Reported on May 5, 2020. Juba, South Sudan. Another imminent disaster heading our way, severe floods as Lake Victoria fills up and rainy season starts in South Sudan. Extremely concerned citizen by Bor Town Mayor, Dr. Mach Majier Gai. Lately, it seems every time I write it's to break bad news. But bad news becomes a disaster when it catches us by surprise. So, as I said in a previous post, if we are to overcome, we must first shed our fear and ignorance of what's coming. Knowing and subsequently deferring or failing to take action is ultimately the real disaster. We owe it to our people and country to stop wasting valuable time, and instead work diligently to rescue the situation. We must brace for the worst as we are facing several daunting challenges at a time the whole world is caught in the grip of an invisible enemy that has brought economies to their knees. Consequently, we must first and foremost rely on what we can do on our own, and in the process build resilience. Then ask for help. Lake Victoria is filling up to record levels not seen since 1964. The levels have been rising consistently since last October from 12 meters to the current level of 13.2 meters, a rise of 1.32 meters in just over 6 months. The unusually long and heavy rains are due to a positive Indian Ocean Dipole (IOD), a weather phenomenon that causes a rise in water temperatures in the Indian Ocean leading to higher evaporation rates off the East African coastline, and this water subsequently falls inland. IOD is Indian Ocean equivalent of Pacific El Niño and La Niña. Its link to climate change is highly likely as extreme IOD-related events are becoming stronger and more common in recent decades. In simple terms, when IOD is positive the effects are felt throughout the Indian Ocean, in East Africa, heavy precipitations, while in Australia, severe droughts and record hot temperatures with devastating effects on marine life and relentless bushfires as was the case in 2019. Conversely, when IOD is negative, East Africa suffers droughts with devastating impact on food production, while Australia is battered by heavy rains. And when IOD is neutral, the conditions are typical of regular weather. Hence, we must monitor this phenomenon more closely. My friend Richard Aludra, a South Sudanese water policy specialist, defines it this way: a positive IOD leads to heavy precipitations in East Africa, but more importantly, with climate change, the precipitation is usually concentrated in very short period leading to floods. A negative IOD is associated with warmer temperatures and droughts in East Africa. The challenge today is that there is a violent swing to higher positives and higher negatives, making East Africa either vulnerable to floods or vulnerable to droughts. Even with recent forecasts of neutral IOD for the coming months, the impacts of the current water rise in Lake Victoria are already felt in the basin countries of Kenya, Uganda and Tanzania. There are reports coming out of East Africa of suspension of water transport ferries due to inundation and submergence of jetties and landing sites, and there was a report of a ferry capsizing recently, suspension of bridge construction, risk of inundation of settlements and establishments near the banks of Lake Victoria and the River Nile, risk to hydropower plants, risk to essential facilities such as drinking water and sanitation systems, health facilities and roads, risk of mud and landslides, among others. To reduce pressure on Lake Victoria, the government of Uganda is rightly taking measures including increasing water release to the Nile at Jinja at a rate of 2,200 cubic meters per second, up from a rate of 1,000 cubic meters per second in October 2019. This is more than double of that discharge rate in such a short time. What does this mean for the Nile Basin's downstream countries? Well, the River Nile is already swelling earlier than expected, with the risk of fluvial flooding, riverine flooding, at a time the rainy season in South Sudan is also underway starting this month of May, further raising the prospects of pluvial flooding, rainfall flood. A combination of fluvial and pluvial flooding in South Sudan, especially in the Greater Upper Nile region, still recovering from last year's catastrophic floods, will prove too great for vulnerable communities to bear. Existing infrastructure will further be eroded, and livelihoods will severely and abruptly be altered. The risk of disease outbreaks will be on the rise, waterborne diseases such as cholera and dysentery, malaria and respiratory infections. This new threat is in addition to all the other crises we have been posting about: COVID-19, hunger, insecurity, economic recession, desert locust invasion, and absence of mandated state governments. So, what's the way forward? Again, in my humble opinion, we are in a serious trouble, and must act accordingly in the interest of public safety. Here's a short list of measures. 1. Form effective governments in the states as a matter of urgency to address these imminent crises. This point cannot be overemphasized. 2. The National Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management, through its Relief and Rehabilitation Commission (RRC), must take measures to mitigate the impact of all these crises on vulnerable populations. 3. As a matter of urgency, evacuate all vulnerable populations from flood-prone settlements on the bank of River Nile and relocate to higher grounds. There is still a very small window of opportunity before mid-May. 4. Where and when possible, reinforce and repair existing dikes. 5. Work with partners, UNICEF and others, in addressing water, hygiene and sanitation needs especially in the affected communities, and activate prevention and control of cholera outbreaks. 6. Strengthen the capacity of existing healthcare facilities to treat malaria and other diseases on the rise. 7. Work closely with humanitarian agencies to provide food aid to affected populations. WFP is a champion in this regard. 8. Preposition veterinary drugs and services for the affected communities. 9. Work with the Ministries of Agriculture and partners in relocating farming to higher grounds this season. 10. Advocate with developmental partners to expedite the implementation of planned flood control projects in South Sudan. 11. Work on plans for a future climate-resilient South Sudan in the medium to long term. 12. Communicate. Mayor Dr. Mach Majier seriously warned authorities and citizens. Reported by Deng Majok, and proudly brought to you by Bor Publishers Australia in solidarity with Bor, Jonglei flood disaster victims.